You know, we're doing these kind of what I like to call intimate presentations with very, very special people. The first one we did was with Jenny and Barbara, which I think really got to give you an idea of what we're doing, what we're creating here at La Fonda, and to kind of stay true to that history, especially Coulter and Gamim. And the next one is with Bruce Bernstein. I met Bruce last year, and Bruce is very good friends with Jenny Kimball, our CEO and one of our owners. Bruce was a director of SWIA for 6 years, and then he's going to tell about some of his other background. But we did last year, he's I think very involved with the tribe of Pewaukee, and we did a fundraiser for the Pewaukee youth hoop dancers. And they were in this room, and then we had things going on in the other room with vendors and people selling jewelry and things. And the Black Eagle drum group from Jemez Pueblo was here in this corner. And they were kids from, I'm going to say, 5 to 18, Bruce, in that range. It was amazing. And Sandy and I were up on that balcony up there because it was crowded in here. I said, well, let's go up and watch it from up above. And it was an incredible, incredible experience. I can't even describe it because it was in this room, in this setting, with those kids doing these incredible dances. I mean, so talented. And they're trying to bring it back, and Bruce is very instrumental in helping bring this youth hoop dance. I think it was lost for many years. I'm not sure, Bruce, or kind of trying to educate the kids on back, and I hope we can do it again. Then on the 23rd of October, we've got Stephen Freed at 3 o'clock, which I think that one you definitely don't want to miss. And then November 20th, thank you to Sue Kogel, Nakona Burgess is coming in to present to the group as well. I think Jane may have said. So we're every month we're going to do something very unique, very special. So Bruce, I want to let you finish kind of giving your bio and telling a little bit more, and thank you for being here.
Well, I'm really happy to be here, and some of you I know, hello. And so my name is Bruce, and I've been around too long. I PhD from UNM, studied with some very particular people that were fantastic and instrumental in my career and life. And I was director of Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, Laboratory of Anthropology, and we did the Here, Now, and Always, added the new wing, and collections remodeled, did some wonderful things, working with communities. And then I was hired from there to go to someplace in DC, and I helped open the new National Museum of the American Indian, where I was director of collections and research. I was on the board of SWIA for the second time, and they were having some problems, which was the first time ever for SWIA to have problems. And I was both stubborn and arrogant enough that thinking I would solve them all, and I solved many of them. I saved SWIA from its own demise. It was shrinking rapidly and would have been gone, but we were able to save it. And but over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working in 2 different positions, both startups, which is really interesting. One is I'm working for the Pueblo Pewaukee and doing some really fantastically interesting things. And as an example of that, on Sunday morning, flying to Washington to begin the final phases of returning collections home from the Smithsonian, be put on view in a resource center at the Pueblo Pewaukee for all the northern villages. So we're just at the beginning stages of that, and been working on that, using my experience and network to help that happen. And the other thing I'm working on is the Ralph T. Coe Foundation for the Arts. Anybody heard of Ted Coe? All right, that's good. Anybody heard of Sacred Circles exhibition? A few people. Well, Ted was very instrumental in the appreciation of Native arts, and did an exhibition in the middle 70s. Believe it or not, there was still the raging debate whether it's ethnography or art, and that exhibition, Sacred Circles, really secured the place that people could think about these things as art. We currently have an exhibition up at the Wheelwright Museum called Connoisseurship and Good Pie. It was originally titled Good Eye and Pie, but I couldn't get away with that. So we decided on connoisseurship. Plus then I learned to spell the word connoisseurship as well. So it was a good thing. So we're doing a lot of things with the Coe Foundation. We have a program tomorrow morning. Terry Greaves is going to talk about the exhibition at the Wheelwright, if you'd like to join us. 10 o'clock, the wheelwright. And there's lunch afterwards at the Coe Foundation. We're a separate building than the wheelwright. We have about 2,000 pieces in the collection that Ted left us. Now, I thought today, because Ed told me you were the smartest group of people he's ever talked with, and I started out with this idea that we would just like take a walking tour through the hotel and just like look at the paintings together. Ed and I did that the other week, where we walked through and we photographed the paintings. The paintings are lovely. You all know that part. And I think that I'm not sure what else I can add to your appreciation other than have to knock you on the side of the head to get you to look at them more closely, perhaps. But they're really great things. But what I really thought would be more interesting, I guess I have to do it this way. What I really thought would be more interesting is to talk about the hotel and why these paintings ended up here and how the paintings ended up here. Talk a little about the context and really to celebrate what's really happened again, certainly through the Ballins' time here as owners, but really with this renovation that Jenny has overseen, that you've heard a lot from Barbara and Jenny about, and what they've done in terms of restoring the hotel back to its original principles. And I think that's what's really interesting to people. The hotel is really a barometer of Santa Fe in so many ways. Jenny one year told me that she closed the bathrooms for fiestas, and there was a huge sign on the door when she walked in, saying that La Fonda's been taken over by outsiders and so on and so forth. But I think that the point is that people, even who don't use the hotel other than its bathrooms, that Jenny does very generously open and clog all the plumbing on this side of town, people really feel like it's still their hotel. And the other week we're in Fiestas is here, it's crowded in here. And it's people, and they're not all hotel guests. And they're not all people just going to use the facilities here. But people still feel that. And if you look at photographs of Santa Fe, I don't know how many of you took the time to go over and see Ride the Pink Pony. Anybody go over and see that? They had the great little piece on Fiestas. And you notice that every scene in Fiestas, the historic photos that weren't outside were inside someplace. And those, of course, were all here in the building. They were in the outdoor patio that's now closed off for the restaurant. So I began to think about the hotel. And I also began to think about, they had this Summer of Color of Summer. What is it? Summer of Color. I got that right? So I began to think about Summer of Color. And, it's the fall of modernism now. Did everybody know that? That's the next promotion campaign. So I began to think about the hotel as the modernist hotel, but I really began to think about modernism. This is where you're so smart that Ed said I can use no pictures, all words. No. I will not make you suffer that, but I'm going to paint you word pictures. So modernism, is really about modern thought, and it's revolt against the conservative principles of realism. So the idea of realism in painting, that paintings are supposed to represent what we see. And so this idea of modernism is about what we feel or what we think about as individuals. And so those traditional forms of art and architecture, the religious and faith and social organization, and they were becoming outdated in this new era beginning in the late 19th, early 20th century. And so the hotel sits amongst all those ideas very, very comfortably. And the idea that the salient characteristic of modernism is self-consciousness. Now just let that sit for a moment. Don't be offended by that idea that it's self-conscious. But it's about experiments with form. So if you think about those aspects, then about the hotel now, let's switch from the theoretical and look to see how the hotel activates this idea of modernism. So modern art's wide-ranging, diverse, okay, and arises from artists or other individual and specific encounter with the world. So an individual and specific encounter with the world. La Fonda was designed and built to provide guests with individual and specific encounters with the world, specifically, of course, Santa Fe and the American Southwest. And then the furnishing and paintings created and maintained an environment of individual exploration. So the idea that the hotel was an oasis that people traveled to Santa Fe to be in a different place. You could stay at the other hotels. You could stay at the El Dorado and feel like you're staying at Marriott, any place in the world. You can eat at McDonald's while you're here and feel like you're eating at another place in the world. But people came here to somehow interact with the culture. And certainly the Harvey Company and then Mary Coulter as the original designer understood that. But how would they put that together? And how would they have the hotel be part of the authenticity of the area that we all live in every day and we all experience every day? So it wasn't just about building a Disneyland, but it was about building an authentic representation of what was going on. So this room actually, I think, is the French pastry shop now, if I'm not mistaken. But this was just individual responses to the situation. So you'd come into the hotel, right? So again, I'm asking you, as docents to imagine the people you're leading around and talking to, that you're taking them, and what are their responses to the situation? What are their responses to being inside the hotel? Not just in the public areas, but the rooms too, right? Are gorgeously appointed in a way where you feel like you're someplace else. You're supposed to be transported into another place. And then you're supposed to reshape your mind a bit. Oh, let's skip this. You know all this stuff already, so I'm not going to go over this too much. The point being, though, New Mexico is a perfect place where so much of other cultures were preserved here. When statehood came around, you know what the two greatest obstacles to statehood were? And they're both code words: Spanish and Catholicism. Those were the two greatest obstacles to statehood for New Mexico. But that otherness of the area of the state, what was to become the state and is now the state, is what brought people here. That suddenly that otherness was of interest to people. And it was an otherness that people could experience firsthand. It wasn't something like in a museum or something made up like a World's Fair, but it was something that was firsthand and actually here. So painters came, right? So you get these sorts of things. So you get this Taos painting. This is his perception. Anybody been to Taos and seen this scene? I doubt it. How about this one? This Henry Sharp, he's a really good painter. I'm not saying anything about his painting style, but the Stoic, right? So everybody sees this. This is on the road to Trujas, right? You see this all the time going up there. I doubt it. But the point being that these non-New Mexicans came here and started painting what they were feeling about the place. And maybe they did see something of this. This is one of my favorite paintings. So this is getting closer than Blumenstein's painting, this dance at Taos. If you've stood in a Pueblo and watched a dance, one of my favorite places to do this was when the dancers at the end of the day, July 14th, at Cochiti returned to the church. There's a narrow alleyway on the north side of the church, and it goes slightly uphill into the front of the church where everybody goes when the saints return to the church. And you get that viewpoint. You get that view. And the people, the tablitas and the men, they sort of melt away, and what you see then is the landscape that just happens to be made of people. These are some other scenes, famous paintings that we can all see, again, made by non-native people. But what are the native people? What were their paintings like? This is the part. We're going to talk about paintings now, I promise. So what did the native paintings look like? So the native paintings look kind of like this. This is one of the best representations we have of native paintings. Anybody seen this painting? You know where it is? Remember? That's right. And you called it by its own name instead of Coronado State Monument, which is interesting. So Pueblo is a place where Coronado famously stayed near in the winter of 1540-41. And he so much laid ravage to the Pueblo that when he returned 6 months later after being led out towards Kansas, returned from Kansas, what's now Kansas, it was abandoned. But these paintings were on the walls there when they excavated the Pueblo in the 1930s. These are Kiva art or Pueblo art that way. So this is what Pueblo people painted, and there's several things going on in a painting like that. It's realism in a way, but it's not realism at all. It's all very subjective. You have a dancer, right, with a corn in his hand like that. It's a man, right? Everybody knows it's a man dancing. How do you know that? Both hands are up. He's praying. And then this eagle here, and somehow the eagle's dropping rain onto people, and then over here is lightning and rain coming from a prayer vessel of some type. This is another panel at the same place, that sometimes we think about art as monolithic in periods of time, and I think that's fine for maybe European ways of thinking. But this is modernist art done probably in the 13th century. And there's several things that's really important about it in terms of modernism. If we were art historians, which I'm not, I would talk to you about these bugs. And the bugs being, neither human nor bug-like, right, first of all. But the other thing that's most important about modernism in painting is it's painted outside the frame. Realism is about taking photographs in paint. It's about an entirety of a frame, right, and seeing the entire view. Modernism is about focusing on your subjectivity of that view, finding what's important to you in that view. So that same Hudson River scene, which is idyllic, and you see the forest, and you see the figures and the way in the background, modernism would bring that up and just show you the sheep's foot, something like that. So this is the same thing, that you're outside the frame. It's a simplistic way of looking at it, but this guy's mostly in, right? They're flying in and out of the frame. So they're within an individual's frame of reference, basically, is what you're talking about. The other thing about painting here is how many directions it goes. Again, if I just urge you to look at this piece in terms of, this is a single panel, also from the same place, and how many different directions the people are going, how many different activities are going on. That we would look at that, and it seems confusing to us in some ways that paintings are usually fairly well organized. So think about paintings being well organized in the way that we think about paintings. How do we organize paintings to make sure we know how to look at them? There's a ground level and a sky, right? We kind of look at things that way. So think about that when we come to a painting. I'll bring this up again. The other thing that's in this painting, which is really important, is the band across the bottom, the red band across the bottom, what we would call wainscoting in our world. And that wainscoting is a red band like you go into rooms. I don't know if there must be someplace in the hotel. It's not like the tile work in here, but there'd be like a painted red stripe across the bottom, right? And in older homes, you still have that. And some newer homes too, probably. And you know what that is? Does anybody know what that is? That is the world in which people emerged, and the white world, the white background, the white walls, the world we live in now. So every room is a place of emergence. And where else is that found in the Pueblo world? You guys really need to come to my talk tomorrow morning. No, not kivas. Well, certainly kivas because they're walls, but something, you've held it in your hand. You've seen it. A pot, red bottom, white sides. So the point being that this idea of where paintings exist and where reality exists and where the secular and the sacred sort of meet, it's everywhere all the time. So the idea, again, going back to La Fonda, that this space is secular and sacred space at the once. Now, it's secular and sacred in the way that Mary Coulter designed it, that you would sit inside that space and you would feel the emotion of the Southwest. And you would feel the greatness of the Southwest and its vastness. Maybe you learn something about one of the cultures that day and so forth. But so you had this sort of emotional response. And then the searching, the subjectivity, the searching for what were those experiences about, to be able to articulate those experiences. So a painter has an experience, and she or he then stands or sits, kneels in front of their easel, right, or their table, and they paint their experience. And we have different reactions to people's experiences, right? that sometimes we look at a painting, right, and you walk away. Other times you look at a painting and it draws you in. And what's drawing you in, your emotional response, you say, wow, oh, that's exactly as I remember, that's how I felt when I was there. So this idea of creation ongoing and this world being a multiple vocal, multiple activity world is an incredibly important part of the way that Coulter understood Pueblo painting. She did a few things. We're in this room, so better in real life than this photo, but especially Ed's photos, which are all kind of like this. This is the best of all of Ed's photos, by the way. But the point is, she tried in the design of the building to have these places of repose. I think that's really what I think the point of the building is. And those places still very much exist. There's still those places of repose in the building, which are really fascinating. That are created spaces, but they're very real spaces. This, of course, is in next door under the fireplace, right? This is fantastic, this sort of thing. And to get the tour, you get your groups to stop and just look at that for a moment. The idea of it, let alone the subject matter. I mean, I don't know how you're using that in your tours, if you're using that now, but forget the subject matter and everything else. It's just the way that it's done is just pretty spectacular. Anybody been to Chalico? A couple of people, a couple of adventure course, yeah. But the point being, you go to this Chalico thing, and it's in the middle of the night, it's the middle of the winter, the wind's blowing, or it's very cold, or it's snowing, right? And you crowd around these houses to see these figures that come once a year into the village. And the thing about that I'd want you to investigate perhaps for your tour is that these aren't, they come just at one time of the year, but there is an entire year's progression of things that go on. So when we see stuff like this as outsiders, non-native people, that we think of it as product. Okay, we think about it as it's a Chalico. But it's really about the process, about the ongoing conversation. So back to Mary Coulter and the hotel then, the hotel is about conversation with its surrounding and outside. Certainly talk about the painting like, that's an eagle dancer, Gerald Cassidy, certainly do that. But there's something else about, because when you look at this eagle dancer, right, besides the one near it, but you look out across the landscape here in New Mexico, there's eagle dancers every place, including in the villages where they probably belong more. So this we've done a little bit already. And so her room design, we talked a little bit about. How about this photo? Anybody seen this photo before? This is like one of my favorite photos. Anybody know anyone in that group?
Where was it taken?
Right outside, right by the door. Those are the steps to the French pastry shop, right? So the guy in the middle is from San Felipe, Pueblo, and he was referred to as Indian Joe. And he walked around town. So for those who have been here a while, not as much now, but there used to be people who used to walk around all the restaurants and sell things. That happens a little bit now, not quite as much, but he was like one of the original characters who did that, and really character. This guy on this side, this is Santiago Naranjo from Santa Clara. He was instrumental in the founding of the Museum of New Mexico, along with the guy on the other side. That's Jesse Nussbaum. Oh, see, you all know who that is. And not the Nussbaum on Nussbaum Street, okay? That's really important. But Jesse Nussbaum was the first person to own a motorcycle in Santa Fe. That's probably his 1907. He rode his motorcycle down from Greeley, Colorado. He had met this guy whose name was Edgar Hewitt, I think. And he had taught woodworking and art for Hewitt at some place called Highlands, which was then the Normal University. And actually, in 1906, he was much younger then. And Nussbaum, along with this other guy, Alfred Kidder, were given a one-page handwritten instructions, see what you can do about figuring out where things are at Mesa Verde. Edgar Lee Hewitt. And actually, Kidder has some hilarious things to say about, they knew nothing about camping and how many problems they had. But Jesse Nussbaum here, we experience him every day. He did the remodel of the Palace building. He is the one that actually built the fine arts, supervised the construction of fine arts. So his life is in this building some way. So this is a very real picture. You get the sort of kind of uncomfortableness of Native people in town selling things, and then you've got Santiago Naranjo, who's a past governor at this point, at Santa Clara, someone who's been instrumental in talking about Native cultures to outside people, and Jesse Nussbaum, who built a lot of how we think of Santa Fe. And sometimes when painters like Sloan or Gustav Baumann tried to paint this, this is the way they sort of did this. This is the way it ended up. So we're back to the quiz part. How did La Fonda activate modernism for its guests, and how did guests become active modernists? And I think that's really the interesting thing about the hotel, and I think that's what draws us to it. So helping guests change their perceptions. So previous tradition, letting go of previous tradition, and creating his or her own individual original techniques. You're sitting in your room, you're sitting under that painting of Romualdo Vigil. You've never seen a painting like that before in your life. The headboard's painted. Why is the headboard painted? Or the furniture's got these funny designs on it, all these different things. So you're wondering, your reality is a bit turned. And you know from the stories you hear about Santa Fe, and maybe all of you, anybody here born here? Ah, perfect group. Really? You were born here? Oh, close. Okay. Anybody here over 10 years? See, so who had the epiphany when they came to Santa Fe, like, I'm going to move there? Come on, more of you had that epiphany. You know that. You had that epiphany like, oh my gosh, what a place. I want to live there somehow. So that's the shattering of the reality. And that is what Coulter, she didn't want anyone to move here, but she wanted people to have that experience at the hotel, to have that emotional response to the hotel, in your own room, in the dining areas, the way people were dressed, all those things, the combination of the Harvey Company and Coulter, taking a series of responses to the situation in the attempt to wrestle universal principles from the collision of the two. So you're sitting in your room, you're sitting under Vigil's painting, or you're standing in front of Sheldon Harvey's painting that come down the stairs from the bell tower, right? And he's got those clouds and those funny forms over the painting. What is Sheldon's reality? We all want to know that anyways. But what's Sheldon's reality here? What is he thinking about? Did he see those clouds that way? Or, oh, that's why he always uses that shape in his paintings. That's what that's about. So there's a kind of a collision of sorts in a way, and then reconciling that. So you want to introduce an authentic, non-mediated Native and Southwestern culture in public and private spaces in the hotel. And I think the hotel's been very successful. And this is how people then experience Native culture in Santa Fe. This is just before the hotel was built. So it was a little contrived. You get these pictures, these idyllic pictures. This is Maria Martinez. And you get these idyllic pictures, and she's working under a tree, of course, all by herself. But the reality of the picture is really this here. If you had a hat, you got a chair. But if you didn't have a hat, you had to sit on the ground. This is Maria and her sisters working and demonstrating. This is another way that people encountered Native people. This is just at the base of La Bajada. This is Santo Domingo people standing out and selling things. Looks kind of pleasant, doesn't it? It's windy. It's always windy. It's got to be springtime and windy. The dust is blowing. I will say I once asked a Santo Domingo woman, it looks so horrible to have to sit by the roadside and sell pottery. You might agree with me about that. And I asked Mrs. Melcher, I said, oh, you used to sit by the road. Boy, that must have been not too pleasant. She said, oh, no. I was being so useful to my family. I was so glad I was doing that. So it shows our perspectives of people sometimes are a bit off. But this is a way that people were were encountered. Nothing over $1, by the way, in that pile. This is another way people sort of posed. She really looks comfortable, doesn't she? And this is another way. This is a St. Louis fair, the St. Louis World Fair in 1904. And this is a group of people from Santa Clara and Okiawinge, San Juan. And they were told to do the snake dance and be Indians. So this is their performance of being other types of people than they actually are. This is a little more real in terms of people, in terms of what's going on. You know that these are actual scenes, how you interact with people still here in the streets here in Santa Fe. This is not so much so. I mean, you've seen this famous photograph before. You know it's retouched. Everybody know this is a retouched photo. These are actually, these two not so pleasant looking young women here are actually two guys. They're porters that have been repainted because you can't possibly have a white person in a lens of seeing native people. So they're actually painted out in the photograph. So one of the ways that the hotel worked to get people out is the Indian detour, which was very real. You know, Erna Ferguson created these detours first. She created this sort of circumstance where people would go out and they would buy a car and go to communities and meet people. And it was bought up by the Harvey Company in 1926, and this was the headquarters for it. You bought the tickets. Everybody knows we purchased tickets for the tours. At Packard's. Packard's was where you bought the tickets. That's where the ticket counter was for the Indian detours. And where were the cars kept? Were the Packard cars? Across the street in near the parking lot, whatever that shopping place. That was where the Packard cars were kept for the tours. So everything was right here. You have to always remember that everything that looks like a gas station downtown actually was a gas station downtown. It was really very concise in terms of that. But this was one way, and people went out into the communities, and they actually met people. It's a little contrived, you know, in the sense that people were waiting and so forth. There's some nice literature about this. But at least people were going out and meeting people firsthand. You didn't have much of an opportunity to talk to people necessarily. Now, many of those women didn't speak English, and their second language would have been Spanish at that time. This is the 30s. And so very often one of the great uses of Indian school at that time was the little kids spoke English, so the kids were sent out. Plus, they're much cuter, so you send the kids out. It's still a device used. I was just at Alex Safety Lane. That's a car repair place here in town. And this little 4-year-old girl walked in with the basket of sandwiches for lunchtime to sell. I mean, how can you turn her down versus whoever was sitting in the car? But here's an example. So we do have the authenticity to rest in and learn from. There's a very famous style of pottery that's painted that many people know about that celebrate in many ways. This is a members pottery from the southwestern corner of the state. And pottery is also metaphoric. Those two pieces in the world is the bottom, is the mother and father portion of the world, mother earth, father sky. So these bowls are meant to be two halves of a sphere. So all this information is around people all the time. How do you bring that information into the public realm? This is another painter. This is a guy named Crescencio Martinez, who I'm just going to talk about in a moment. But these are his paintings on this jar, right? Looks like a man and a woman, maybe for a dance or maybe for a wedding. And these are two of the earliest painters in this scene, the two guys standing in the back here. So these two fellows here, anybody know who they are? Just take a wild guess. One's my dad, one's my uncle. So Julian Martinez, no. One's Julian Martinez and the other is Crescencio Martinez. They are not related, although they had the same last names. They are from San Ildefonso, Pueblo. And of course, they're the ones that worked with Hewitt on the Pajarito. And one of the things that they began to do up there, this is a Julian Martinez painting, and there are similar paintings up in the lobby. So one of the things that Hewitt asked them to do was to paint. And he asked them to paint in order to preserve their culture. He felt that native culture was dying out, so he could basically use painting as documentation. And when he asked people to do that, he asked Crescencio Martinez in particular, which these were done in the winter of 1916, 1917. And I promise it's not that fuzzy in real life. But he asked Crescencio to paint every dance scene he could think of. and he got through 50 of those dance scenes. He unfortunately died in the influenza epidemic in 1917. Could be because when he came to town to paint these 50 pictures in that winter, he lived in the stables of the previous hotel here at La Fonda. Not the nicest place to live. Now, another guy who's up on those digs in the Pajarito Plateau is this guy, Alfredo Montoya. And this is a very important man, and there are no paintings in La Fonda's collection by Alfredo Montoya because he died very young, a very young guy. But the thing about, he's probably the first painter, and the thing, if you'll notice about the paintings, is the lack of ground line, lack of sky. You're actually looking across a plaza, right? If you think about the paper as the dance plaza, and think about the figures on that dance plaza. So you're in your room, you're looking at a painting like this, your idea of what paintings are supposed to be, first of all, it's supposed to be all green trees, right? That's the first thing that, it's supposed to have kind of a leaden sky from the clouds that hang over it all the time. But here's a painting that would shatter some of those preconceived ideas of what all people are like, just in its very layout, that he's taken a piece of paper and made it into the entire plaza. And when you're looking across the plaza, right, and those of you who have seen dances, you know that you certainly sometimes you have a view where you're seeing through people, but if you were elevated up on the plaza, you would see dancers laid out like that, right? The other thing is this, that in non-native painting, very often people put in features so you know where they're painting. It's a tree, or it's a particular building, or a ruin, or something like that, right? So you know the location. These dances take place all the time in places of origin. The world is constantly being renewed. So the idea that that red wainscoting and the white, the pot, the red and the white, that the world is constantly in an act of becoming. So you don't need to place these figures by some tree or by some date. They are timeless in the very most real sense. So when these types of figures were painted on these forms, that is what you saw. So here's another painting. So again, this idea that they're timeless. There's no marking of the paint date or time, place, right? There's just none of that on the painting. But if you know about the year's cycles, if you just stop for a moment and think about the year's cycles and what goes on in the year's cycles, what time of year is this? For those of you who know something about Pueblo culture, it's winter time. It's an animal dance. That means the winter side of the Pueblo that's now dancing at that time. And because it's from San Ildefonso, it's probably January 26th or so when the animals come down out of the mountains into the village. So it's not a painting, just an arbitrary painting. It is a very specific scene of a very particular day in the cycle of the year. It's not like 1926, but it's like in our cycle we do this. I wasn't there when this was painted in 1919, but I've seen this. It's exactly the same. And that's the point of the painting, that it's timeless. It's a true timelessness in a way of thinking about these things. Everybody with me still? I haven't lost you yet? Okay. Now these three guys, I just love this picture too. These are three important characters. Anybody know anyone more? With what? That's right. Julian Martinez is on the left side. He's a lot older than the other two guys, which is true. He is older by about 15 years at this point. Now, one of the things I would urge you, if I had a picture of Tony Abeda, Mateo Romero, and Sheldon Harvey, I should have done that. Actually, I hadn't thought of that. Darn. If I put that painting, I put that photo up, the three of them together, could you tell the three of them apart? All right, you're good then. My point is, I think to know the artist means you're going to know the artwork better. I really do, and I think that's an important part of this. So Julian Martinez, Valino Shihi Herrera, and this is Alfonso Roybal on the far end, or Awat Serra, as he's sometimes called, or I shouldn't say, that's what his Tewa name is, Awat Serra. So these are these three guys. I don't think Julian Martinez looks very happy there, but that's the whole other thing. And it gives you a sense of these guys, and just what they sort of look like and so forth. And this is another chapter. So the first chapter I showed you in native painting is a chapter that comes out of the founding of the museum in school. It comes out of those excavations on the Pajarito Plateau. Those men who worked on those excavations, Julian Martinez, Crescencio Martinez, Alfredo Montoya, even Santiago Naranjo was up there. They are the worst ones to begin painting, begin selling their paintings. So when you see those early paintings, those are what those paintings are all about. Then the next group of painters are Belino Shihi, Herrera, and Alfonso Roybal, and a few other guys. There's actually 5 more of these individuals. And they all begin to paint in 1917 at the Santa Fe Indian School. And Elizabeth de Huff asked people to come into her living room. They're eventually fired for doing something outside of the program. Indian School at that time was about making, as it was said in the literature, to productive citizens. That meant for Native people that they would end up in the lower rungs of society, like house painters and laundresses, maybe bakers and so forth. They would not be encouraged or learn to be doctors or lawyers or engineers, but were given a certain task according to the way society thought. Everybody's hair was cut, people wore uniforms, they were marched out in the mornings. And within that Indian school then, this woman, Elizabeth de Huff, invited these boys to come into her room, 1 woman and 6 boys, and she invited them to come into her living room, which was a no-no as well. They weren't allowed in the superintendent's house. And she invited them to paint. And to paint scenes about their native lives. So everything that Indian school is about, she asked them to forget for a couple hours a day. And that's why they were eventually let go from Indian service. Didn't fit the mode at that particular time. So here's Awit Sarah, who's one of these guys, not so much in the living room, but he's a contemporary of them. These are the sorts of things that he painted. It's interesting, his painting, I think, because this is kind of how he started out, maybe even a self-portrait here. And then this is another way that he painted. He painted this way, and there's 2 origins of this style of painting. One is that people in his community started to talk to him about, well, what are you painting? You're revealing too much, or I don't want to be in your paintings, or don't put me in your paintings, or don't even think about it. And so he started painting people more generally speaking. He also became very interested in Egyptian art. There's a huge Egyptian art movement in the early 20s based around Downton Abbey, discovery of King Tut's tomb. The Earl of Downton Abbey actually sponsored that expedition. So there became a great interest. And so a lot of these are Egyptian in feel, and they're probably in relation to his interest in what was going on in the world around him. And so there's a kind of generalization. They're still filled with information about the community. This is also, he could paint like this. This is another scene. This is a corn dance scene. And again, the perspective, he's got all the things we've been talking about in terms of there's no ground line, there's no sky, but you know where this is. If you know something about, you know that this is the summertime then, right? It's a corn dance of some type and so forth. It's orderly as it's supposed to be. It's symmetrical in many, many ways, and people are following the steps. If you look, all the dancers have their foot up just right. The women are demure in their posture and so forth. The chorus singing. So you get a sense of that from his world again. A sort of collision of world. If you think about the dance scenes, like I showed you that dance scene from Sloan. It's a little chaotic. He's got the Kosa coming down from one of the Kiva steps in that painting. Or Bauman's painting I showed you, if you remember that for a moment. It's a little chaotic. He's got Katsina figures in a dance going on around it. So it's a bit chaotic. So if we want to have an authentic experience, you might want to turn to the people who are actually more knowledgeable in it. Here's a Fred Cabote painting. The same idea again. This is a very early Fred Cabote painting. Cabote is a really interesting man, and he went to Indian school. He then, actually Hewitt encouraged him to go to Santa Fe High. And so he goes to Santa Fe High and graduates from Santa Fe High. He's a great saxophone player. He plays with all these jazz bands around town. He's a great bicyclist as well. and he paints. So he's working for the museum. He's got a custodial job with the museum, and every day he's obligated to do some custodial stuff. But he's also obligated to paint for 2 or 3 hours every single day in his studios over in the Palace of the Governor's building. So Hewitt's trying to get people sort of engaged and get them to paint and so forth. And the wonderful thing about Capote, so he left Hopi so he comes to Indian school in 1917. So he's 15 years old, and he doesn't go back to Hopi for a good about 10 years after that. So these paintings, which he does in that 10-year interim, are really from his mind. You can tell what a great memory he has. They're rarely embellished. A recent scholar's thing I read for peer review, she thought it was they were mnemonic devices for Hopi people, that he felt he needed to save Hopi culture for Hopi people. Let me just go back, and what that means was but this author was suggesting that Hopi culture was dying, and a person like Fred Capote took it on himself to save it by painting what he remembered of it, and then people could recreate the dances. I couldn't think of anything more wrong than that, but I think trying to relate that back to the hotel is important in the sense that these are authentic scenes. This is what Capote participated or remembered from his own community. These are the ways, certainly there's small changes in dances because people change over time and so forth, but these are the sorts of scenes that people could sit in, and let's say somebody at the hotel had the fortune of seeing a dance someplace and come back. You could hear the songs and the prayers going on when you came back to the hotel and sat in your own room exhausted from being out in the sun too long and having one too many margaritas and not being aware of the altitude. And also this is the first woman painter of this group. This is Tanita Pena. And she painted everything from the perspective of the roof of her house. So if you think about that for a moment, that her house is on the plaza at Cochiti, and it's a one-story house. It's kind of a low-slung building, but she's painting everything as she sees the dances. So if you begin to think about that, right, that's how you can see the line of dancers there. And if you begin to pay attention to the paintings themselves, again, it's about this particularity of the world here, that all the paintings, just like all the paintings in the building still, all have this individuality to them, that Tanita Pena is from someplace different than Fred Capote. So while it might look like an Indian dance, or that they have Indian dress on, or there's an Indian drum, no. It's from Cochiti, it's from the 1930s, Everything has a very particular instance to it. These are the closest things to photographs of some of these things that we have in that sense. Oh, this is another Capote. And you can see his idea of order is very much lined out. But this is and this is a man then from San Ildefonso. This is Okapi, Abel Sanchez. This is Russell Sanchez, his grandfather, if you know who Russell is. So this is Russell's grandfather. And you can see that, again, even deer out on the landscape, that the landscape is not painted, that it's avoided at all costs because you just don't need it. And there are other things about the painting, the red ears and the green antlers, that are very particular to the types of things. But he's giving you so much information in a painting that looks so simple, just about 3 deer running around. Now, the third and final phase I wanted to talk about is the Dorothy Dunn School and the Santa Fe Indian School. So schools begin to change a bit in the late 20s. Indian schools begin to change. People realize through a couple radical things that happen that Native people have a lot of really, really important things to offer our society at large. And some of that actually came out of the Santa Fe community. There was a lot of advocates for Native people who spoke very powerfully on behalf of Native people. It still wasn't about them becoming doctors and lawyers, but it was about their idea of seeing the world and the value of them seeing the world that way and being really aware of what was going on in that world in a way that could be very valuable to our society at large. And so part of that change then came at the Santa Fe Indian School in the fall of 1932 in the personage of Dorothy Dunn. And Dorothy Dunn was an art teacher. She had been on here in the 20s. She had started her life working at the other hotel at the Bishop's Lodge as a waitress. And then because she had gone to Chicago Art Institute, she then went down to San Domingo and began teaching elementary school there. And she has a great story about San Domingo. So she's got all these little kids, and the parents are already suspicious of what's going to go on in the school. And the parents would actually walk the kids up, kind of watch in the windows sometimes and come and get them. It wasn't like they just let their kids go with this crazy white woman in the school. But so Dorothy Dunn tells a story that the day before had been a dance in the village, and she was enthralled by the dance. So she turns to the blackboard and she draws all the things she saw at the dance, right? And she draws them up on the blackboard and she turns them around, and the kids are all horrified that she has drawn the things that she is not supposed to be drawing at all, and they probably shouldn't be seeing as small kids. And she actually used that as a lesson, although she was kind of a crusty woman, so I'm not sure that she actually learned that much from it. But she understood that there was a difference between her point of view and the kid's point of view. And I think that was important. But so she comes to Indian school in 32 as a math teacher, actually. And it's agreed that she can teach this art class. So she sets up this space. They give her no money for supplies. There are 3 kids in the class when she opens it. And by the end of December of 1932, there's 183 kids in the class. And what happens is, and this is from Mrs. Montoya, Jerry Montoya, who was a very good friend. Jerry said, we'd go in the class and we didn't know what to paint. And Dorothy would say to us, well, paint what's going on in your village today. So in the midst of this Indian school, you're going to school, let alone trying to assimilate these kids into broader American culture and so forth, you suddenly have an hour during the day where someone is saying to you, be proud of who you are, where you're from. Let me see something about that. Use that in some way. It was also thought that this would be ways for people to enter the economy, that arts would be a way. This, of course, is a longer trend here in Santa Fe that I spent a long part of my career on. I'm not going to bore you. I promised I wouldn't show you any pots, but I already showed you 2. But this is Pueblo Velarde, who was one of her students in that class. And this is the way that this is what she's most famous for. And this is bad examples, good examples. This is actually from the wall of her classroom. This is actually her. When I was at the Museum of Indian Arts, we had a really fine collection of these style of paintings that had come to the museum. But her daughter had moved back here, and I went over there, like the museum guy. I'm always asking to help the museum in some way. And I went over there. I wanted to meet her besides and hear what she had to say about her mom. And I said, do you have any papers or anything from your mother? I'm just wondering, if there must be some other things. She said, no, there's nothing else. Okay. So I went back another day and I said, do you have anything from your mother? It must be papers or something else. So we went in the bathroom and we moved around the toilet, and we moved the cat box, and there's these cabinets around the toilet, like ringing the toilet, and she pulls out those old style cardboard portfolios, and there's only like 10 of them, and she pulls out these portfolios. It's like this is in those portfolios. So this is bad stuff. This is what you're not supposed to do. And there's several things about that, and this is where Dunn's reputation comes. While if you talk to most of the students in her classes that I had the opportunity to talk to, they talk about her very fondly. Hauser didn't like her very much for other reasons. But and Pablita always had something to say about her, let's just say. But the tops are wrong because they're stereotyped images. But the top are kind of stereotyped images. They're also that those images on the far left are not images from the kids' own experience. That these are Pueblo kids in her classrooms. So these are kind of generalized, plains ideas of what Indians look like, not what a Santa Clara kid looks like or a San Ildefonso kid. This is what Indians, which is a generalized term. And then the 2 in the middle are probably the most telling. You see those all have foregrounds and backgrounds. They have ground and sky painted, right? No, because she thought, and rightfully in some ways, that the true style of Indian painting was what had already arisen. And all those paintings I've showed you up till now with no background and so forth, that is a total indigenous native style. Nobody told anyone how to paint any of those ways of painting. People knew how to paint, they transferred it to paper. Dunn took that idea, and so she outlawed those types of views in her class. So she becomes very famous. So these are first attempts by people in her classroom at painting things. And she liked these, no background, a little bit of form on the ground there. But that's a Navajo painter. He's allowed to have a little bit of ground. I've never understood quite why, but all the Pueblo kids aren't allowed to have that. And in her writing, it actually says early work, tending towards the right thing, early work that needed to be dismissed. What happens then is she gets paintings like this. This is a young woman from Santa Ana. And this is the most honest portrait of this young woman's or young girl's experience that day in her life. So when Dunn said, paint something from your home community, this is the most honest portrait. So again, going back to the Modernist Hotel, how much more authentic can you get than this? And you can see what the honesty of it is, because if white people had painted it, or even people just for the marketplace, they would have painted out the buckets, and they would have painted out the jeans, right? And they would have left then just native people as they imagined or romanticized them, rather than how native people actually looked on that day in 1933. So to me, these paintings are incredibly wonderful in that way, that they show that honesty. This is a painting by Geronimo Montoya, or Jerry Montoya. And Jerry painted this in 36 or 37, I can't remember. And it looks like a painting that's just created. Like, we'd like to have a painting showing all Pueblo art forms. Could you make us a painting like that? Actually, this would be all things that could be happening at once. These are art forms that are very much alive in Jerry's early years. So these are art forms. So she's showing a portrait of how the village might be that day. Maybe not everybody's sitting together every place, but this is a portrait of how the village is that day in terms of people working together, the community aspects, and it's all women, which is very important. Jerry also, it's hard to see, the picture's not that good, I apologize, but the wonderful calico everybody's wearing is fantastic. Everybody has their everyday, other than the woman getting dressed to dance, everybody has their everyday dress on in terms of calico and so forth. This is another picture. This is Joe Duran from Tasuki. And again, the idea, so this is shinny or stickball. It's a very particular thing that people do in the springtime. The ball is filled with seeds, and actually in one of the first Indian markets, they played it up and down Washington Avenue. And the idea is that the seeds is fertility that people are pushing back and forth. And sometimes men against women, or different moieties in the villages and so forth. But look how active that is. Look how wonderful. And again, without the use of any form, you don't need the ground to show on this one. You don't need rocks or plants to show you where that is. Pulp Chalet, same thing again. You know, this sort of idea of hers, using the background color, what she saw in the world in that way. What's his name? Yeah, this is him. It'll come to me, I'm sorry. It's a young Navajo man. But again, the idea that he's able to take this idea, this is a Yebiche dance, and you can see all the different things going on, and the honesty of the portrait. You just look at the people's faces, and you know how much is going on in that particular painting, and that he actually was there. And then also the sense of timelessness again. This is a Joe Herrera painting. Joe Herrera is Tanita Roybal's son of Cochiti. Joe passed away a few years ago now. But look at the amount of movement. So some people have been to dances, right? So a dance is really about the emotion. If you think about dances, if we were going to do something about dancing, right, which a lot of these paintings are about, and I gave you a quiz, which shoulder is left bare on a woman's manta? You see? Okay. Which hand is the evergreen held? What type of evergreen is it? What's the first beat of the drum sound like? Now, just forget all that. Just forget it for a moment. And think about how you felt, other than maybe hot and tired. But think about how you felt standing there. And just, you're standing there, and maybe there's some chairs in front of you. Maybe you're just up in the front, and you're watching the dance go by, right? And there's this movement, and you can't believe how much movement's going on, and is how active it is, right? And it's just, it's that essence that these guys are collecting their paintings. So when you look at Tony's work, or you look at Matteo's work, you know, that's prominently featured here. You look at Brian, actually Brian Brio's painting is really an important painting that's here. There's so many wonderful portraits of people that people have done about their vision of the world. And it's that vision of the world that is really what the hotel is about. It wasn't just then a piece of the world that was going to be recreated like the Bellagio or whatever MGM hotel in Las Vegas, where you're going to bring the Eiffel Tower and so forth. But here, it's such an honest way that the hotel is built in a way, and people not just on the outside. It's not adobe, right? I'm sorry. Did I just wreck someone's preconceived notion of the hotel? It's not made of adobe. It's made out of brick. It's made out of concrete. So it has an illusion of being older than it even is. But it was sitting with these authentic things inside that really made the difference for people. And I think still makes the difference for people when they come here. And that's the way I think the hotel is really the leading modernist here in Santa Fe. So thank you everyone for your attention. I appreciate it very much.